In the dense woodlands of the Ohio Valley, where the trees reach up like ancient titans grasping for the heavens, an eerie silence often falls with the night. The locals speak in hushed tones of the man with no face, a spectral figure clad in a black garment that seems to swallow the light around it. As dusk approaches, the forest's innate murmur dwindles, as if the very creatures themselves are wary of drawing his attention. Legend has it that the man with no face was once a woodsman, a person of flesh and blood, who fell victim to a mysterious curse that not only robbed him of his visage, but also of his mortality. Now he wanders the woods endlessly, a shadow among shadows, his presence marked by a chilling void where a face ought to be. Some say he is the guardian of the valley, others claim he is a harbinger of doom, but all agree on one harrowing detail: those who encounter him in the twilight woods are never seen again. As the tale goes, a curious and brave, or perhaps foolhardy, soul by the name of Eli ventured into the woods, determined to unravel the mystery of the man with no face. He left behind a journal, its pages filled with scribbled notes and wild theories, which was found on the threshold of the forest. The last entry was dated the very night he disappeared, a frantic scrawl that ended mid-sentence. The story that unfolds from here is one of chilling encounters, whispered warnings, and unsolved disappearances. Page by page the fear grows as the man with no face draws nearer, his inhuman silence more terrifying than any scream. The woods of the Ohio Valley hold many secrets, and somewhere in the darkness between the trees, a faceless spectre is waiting to claim the next soul brave or foolish enough to seek him out. Under a crescent moon's sliver of cold light, Michael, a seasoned hiker known for his intrepid spirit, found himself on unfamiliar trails as twilight deepened. The paths, once welcoming under the sun's gaze, twisted into a labyrinthine tangle that mocked his every turn. A heavy mist, like a shroud, began to rise from the earth, and with it the sensation of being followed crept upon him. He first heard the rustle of leaves, a soft whisper against the forest floor. Rational thought attributed it to the wind, but the air was as still as death. Turning sharply, he peered into the gloom, searching for a sign of movement, a hint of life. There was none. Yet the feeling of eyes upon him, eyes he could not see, grew more intense. Michael's breaths became shallow, his heartbeat a frenzied drum in his chest. As he quickened his pace, the rustling followed, keeping time with his own steps. Panic clawed at his mind, urging him to run, to escape the unseen pursuer. But which way? The trails now seemed to convolute further, ensnaring him in a web of shadow and dread. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the mist, tall, impossibly still, and clad in black that drank in the moonlight. Michael's eyes were drawn to its face, or rather, the void where a face should have been. The man with no face stood sentinel on the path before him. Michael's blood ran cold, his limbs trembling not just from the chill in the air, but from the visceral fear that rooted him to the spot. With a surge of desperate courage, Michael darted down a side path, his only thought to put distance between himself and the nightmare incarnate. But the forest was no longer the realm he knew. It was a domain of twisted trees and creeping vines that seemed to reach for him as he passed. He doubled back, tried another route, only to find himself facing the same silent figure, a black hole in the world that seemed to follow with relentless patience. The night grew darker, the mist thicker, and Michael, once the master of trails and treks, was now a prey lost in an endless hunt. He stumbled through bramble and brook, his cries for help absorbed by the oppressive woods. The deeper into the forest he plunged, the closer his faceless pursuer seemed to be, until the woods themselves whispered with the voice of the man with no face, a soundless call that promised an end to the chase, an end to everything. Michael's legs burned with exertion, his breaths coming in ragged gasps as he tried to maintain his desperate flight through the woods. His mind reeled with terror, every shadow a spectre, every sound a threat. And then, with a jarring thud that knocked the wind from his chest, he collided with what his frazzled senses believed to be the rough bark of a tree. But as he looked up, the starless expanse where a face should reside met his gaze. The man with no face was before him, an abyss in human guise. In that moment Michael's world spun, and he felt an inexorable pull toward the darkness where the man's face should have been. It was as if the very air around him had thickened, turned to tar, and was drawing him in. A silent scream tore at his throat as he succumbed to the void. Consciousness faded, and when it returned, Michael was adrift in an ocean of darkness. The ground beneath him was no longer the soft loam of the forest floor, but the hard, cold stone of what his reeling mind processed as a vast, subterranean cave. He could feel himself being dragged, the scrape of rock against his back a cruel reminder that he was still very much alive. The cave, or was it some nightmarish underworld, was punctuated by intermittent cries that echoed off the unseen walls, each one a symphony of agony that chilled Michael to his core. Twisted shadows flitted in the periphery of his vision, suggesting the presence of creatures so grotesque that his mind shied away from fully comprehending their forms. There was a perverse beauty to the glimmers of bioluminescence that occasionally lit the darkness, revealing glimpses of a realm that should never see the light. Time seemed to stretch and contort, minutes stretching into what felt like hours of this hellish procession. Michael's thoughts became disjointed, a disjointed melange of fear, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of doom. The Faceless Man had become his Charon, ferrying him deeper into the Stygian abyss, and with each drag across the uneven ground, Michael felt himself slipping further from the world he knew, drawn into the dark heart of the Ohio Valley's most terrifying legend. The oppressive darkness that had enveloped Michael began to relent, giving way to an ominous glow that hinted at a source of light as unnatural as the darkness had been. It flickered like the flames of a campfire, but its luminescence was harsher, more sinister, as if it were the glow of a furnace rather than the comforting light of a hearth. The air grew stifling, the heat bearing down on him with such intensity that sweat beaded on his forehead, and his skin prickled with the threat of burns. Suddenly he was released, the relentless grip of the man with no face loosened, and Michael was left lying on the stony ground, gasping for air that now seared his lungs with its scorching kiss. The Faceless Man receded into the shadows, leaving Michael in the care of this new, glowing hell. Before he could gather his wits or will his scorched body to rise, he felt them, hands, more than he could count, each one a searing brand upon his flesh. They emerged from the fiery brightness, from the heat that seemed to warp the very air around him. These hands, if hands they truly were, clutched at him with a fevered desperation, pulling him toward the source of the light that now filled his vision with a blinding intensity. The heat was unbearable, a ravenous beast that threatened to consume him. He was dragged inexorably forward, the sounds of his own screams joining the cacophony of wails and cries that filled the cavernous space. Michael's mind was aflame with panic as he tried to fight against the multitude of hands, but they were everywhere, insistent and unyielding. As he was hauled closer to the searing core of light and heat, the screams crescendoed into a single, piercing note of pure terror. The hands dragged him over a threshold he could not see, into a brilliance that seemed to promise not salvation, but annihilation. In that moment, Michael knew no more of the world he had left behind, only the unbearable heat, the blinding light, and the harrowing realization that he was about to become one with the Ohio Valley's most enigmatic and fearsome legend. The man with no face, a sentinel of shadows, stood once more in the quiet gloom of the Ohio woods, an observer to the silence that followed the chaos. His form, a mere silhouette against the dense foliage, seemed to ponder the fate of the one he had just delivered to the abyss. In the stillness, a memory stirred, a spectre from his own past, as ethereal and distant as the stars veiled by the night's canopy. There was a time before the darkness, before the void claimed his features. He had been approached, so the fragmented memories whispered, by a man as enigmatic as a desert mirage. This stranger, with a beard as dark as the woods at midnight and skin kissed fiercely by the sun, bore eyes of piercing blue that seemed to hold the depth of the skies themselves. His attire was incongruous with the woodland setting, a black suit that spoke of formalities and promises, a stark contrast to the earthy tones of the forest. The stranger's offer was as alluring as a siren's song, eternal life within the embrace of the woods that the woodsman held dear, freedom from the mortal coil's frailties, and an insatiable yearning that would give purpose to his endless days. To a man whose heart was as much a part of the forest as the oak and ash, this was a dream woven into a tantalizing possibility. But as with all things that gleam too brightly in the dusk, the promise was a double-edged sword. In the blink of an eye, the man with the sunburnt skin and oceanic eyes vanished, leaving behind a new reality of perpetual night. The woodsman found himself trapped in a world devoid of color, of face, of the life he knew, cast into a role he had not foreseen. His eternity was not one of peaceful coexistence with the woods he loved, but rather an unending cycle of servitude to a hunger he could not sate. His task was simple, yet macabre: to lure souls to a cave, a portal to a place of screams and searing heat, and to abandon them to a fate beyond understanding. In this twisted immortality, the man with no face found no solace, only the relentless drive that turned his once kind heart to a thing of darkness, compelled to do the bidding of a deal he could not remember agreeing to. He was a prisoner to the yearning, the very thing that had seemed a gift, now his eternal curse. The woods whispered his tale, a cautionary whisper on the wind, a reminder of the price of yearning for more than what life offers.